something shifted in how Apple signals premium. For years, the formula was almost philosophical in its restraint. Pro meant muted graphite silver, the occasional deep blue that still read as serious. Bold colors were reserved for the regular line of fun, accessible, but not serious. And now, Bloomberg is reporting that the iPhone 18 Pro may arrive in deep red, not a product red, charity variant, months later, a launch color for the Pro line. That timing is interesting because at the same time, supply chain reports suggest Apple's first foldable iPhone is finally entering production with crease measurements that tell a story about patience, perfectionism, and perhaps a miscalculation, two moves. Seemingly unrelated, but look closer, and they might be saying the same thing about where Apple sees pressure and where they're choosing to adapt. The Bloomberg report is fairly direct. Apple is considering a deep red for the iPhone 18 Pro and Pro Max. This wasn't a random creative decision. The trigger was apparently the unexpected success of the orange variant on the iPhone 17 Pro Max, specifically in the Chinese market. Now, pause on that for a moment. Apple's Pro line color decisions, historically among the most conservative in the industry, are being influenced by regional market response. That's not how Cupertino typically operates. The usual rhythm is decide globally, deploy globally. Not we'll test in one market, adjust for the next generation. What this suggests is that Apple is reading signals from China differently than before. The Chinese smartphone market has been brutal for foreign manufacturers. Domestic brands like Huawei, Xiaomi, and Oppo have gained significant ground by offering aggressive specifications at lower price points, but also by treating design as a primary competitive weapon, not an afterthought. Color, in this context, becomes a status signal, and Apple may have recognized that their muted Pro palette, while projecting premium in Western markets, was underserving the aesthetic preferences of Chinese consumers who view bold color choices as markers of distinction rather than frivolity. This isn't Apple becoming Samsung. Samsung has long treated colors as seasonal fashion statements, constantly rotating, always experimental. Apple's approach appears more calculated. Identify a commercially validated color preference, then integrate it into the Pro identity framework. Now, it's worth noting that rumors of a deep red iPhone Pro have surfaced before. McRumors documented similar speculation ahead of the iPhone 15 launch, and that color never materialized. Apple tests many options that don't reach production. The deep red report could be a trial balloon that gets abandoned once manufacturing realities or internal brand committees weigh in. But the Bloomberg sourcing on this one feels more concrete, and the reasoning and linking it to the orange success data gives it a commercial logic that pure speculation lacks. If Apple does follow through, it would represent a quiet but meaningful shift in how the company defines premium. For over a decade, the Pro designation has been associated with restraint, the idea that professionals don't need flashy colors, that serious tools look serious. Bringing bold colors to the Pro line suggests Apple is becoming more comfortable with the idea that premium can also be expressive, that status signaling and professional credibility aren't mutually exclusive. And here's the thing that doesn't get said enough. Online discourse optimizes for specifications. Most people optimize for how a device makes them feel, and color is a surprisingly large part of that equation. A phone you're proud to place on a table at dinner matters. Even if tech enthusiasts roll their eyes at cosmetic changes, the silent majority of buyers are making decisions on exactly those terms. The foldable iPhone appears to be real this time. Supply chain reports indicate it's entering production alongside the iPhone 18 Pro and Pro Max later this year, and we now have specific technical measurements that reveal something about Apple's approach. The crease depth on Apple's foldable display is reportedly below 0.15 millimeters. The crease angle is less than 2.5 degrees. For context, the Galaxy Z Fold 7, Samsung's current flagship foldable, measures around 0.7 millimeters in crease depth with an estimated angle of 3 to 4 degrees. In plain terms, Apple's crease would be roughly 5 times less visible than Samsung's current best. This is the classic Apple play. Wait, observe, let competitors absorb the early adopter tags. Then enter with a refined version that addresses the most visible pain point of the category. In this case, the crease. For years, reports suggested Apple delayed its foldable specifically because they wanted to eliminate the crease entirely. That didn't happen. What they achieved instead is impressive, but it's still a crease. The question becomes, was the multi-year wait worth it? From a pure engineering standpoint, Apple's hinge and display combination represents a genuine advancement. A crease depth of 0.15 millimeter is approaching the threshold where most users might genuinely not notice it during regular use. That matters for the type of buyer Apple targets, people who are willing to pay premium prices but expect premium experiences. Here's where the story gets complicated. Samsung, the company that essentially created the foldable category, has reportedly already demonstrated foldable displays with no visible crease zero, at least when new. If Samsung deploys this technology in the Galaxy Z Fold 8, which is expected this year as well, Apple's "we waited to do it right" narrative becomes harder to sustain. This isn't about declaring a winner. Both companies are pushing the technology forward, but it does illustrate a strategic risk Apple took by waiting. They ceded years of market presence and customer education to Samsung, betting they could leapfrog in quality. If Samsung matches or exceeds Apple's crease performance in the same product cycle, Apple's patience begins to look less like wisdom and more like missed opportunity. But there's another angle here that's worth considering. Apple's foldable reportedly won't launch with bold colors. The options mentioned are conservative black, dark gray, white, silver. That feels deliberate. First-generation Apple products tend to be restrained. The original iPhone launched in one color. The original Apple Watch had limited options. The Vision Pro is silver only. Apple often positions its category entrants as serious tools, then expands visual expression in later iterations once the technology is proven and manufacturing stabilizes. This could be read as conservative, but it could also be read as disciplined product management. The foldable iPhone is already asking users to accept a new form factor, new usage patterns, and a significant price premium. Adding experimental colors might fragment attention and create production complexity during a critical launch window. What's revealing is the divergence between these two product strategies. The iPhone 18 Pro line, a mature established product, is being used to experiment with visual identity. The foldable iPhone, an entirely new category entry, is being positioned with maximum restraint. Apple is effectively treating color innovation as the safer bet than form factor innovation, and that tells you something about where they see competitive pressure versus where they see opportunity. Taken individually, these stories might seem like routine product development. Apple tries new colors. Apple enters foldables, standard corporate behavior. But there's a pattern worth noticing. Both moves represent Apple responding to pressures rather than dictating them. The bold Pro colors are a response to Chinese market dynamics and the success of competitors who treated aesthetics as a primary competitive dimension. The foldable, despite years of internal development, is finally launching in a window where Samsung has already established the category and potentially leapfrogged Apple's technical achievement. This isn't a criticism. Responding to market signals is rational, but it does challenge the popular narrative that Apple operates purely on its own timeline, immune to competitive pressure. The timing is interesting because it suggests Apple is becoming more responsive to regional preferences and category dynamics than their public positioning typically acknowledges. The company that famously said, customers don't know what they want until we show them is now reading tea leaves from Chinese color preferences and foldable display benchmarks set by competitors. One possible interpretation: Apple's scale has grown so large that pure innovation leadership becomes riskier than calculated adaptation. When you're selling over 200 million iPhones annually, the cost of a misstep outweighs the benefit of being first. Better to observe what resonates than execute with refinement. Another interpretation: Apple is simply being pragmatic. The smartphone market has matured, revolutionary changes are harder to justify. Color options and form factor experiments are lower risk ways to signal progress while maintaining the reliability their customer base expects. Here's what I find most revealing about these parallel stories. Apple is allowing the iPhone 18 Pro, their established flagship, to become more expressive, more experimental in its visual identity. Meanwhile, their most significant new product entry in years, the foldable, is being launched with maximum restraint. That inversion says something about how Apple manages risk. They're willing to push boundaries on mature products where the manufacturing is proven and the customer expectations are set. But on new categories, they fall back to the playbook that served them for decades. Enter with something refined, conservative, reliable, and then expand. The deep red iPhone Pro might look like a small thing, just a color, but strategically it represents Apple acknowledging that premium doesn't have to mean muted anymore, that different markets express status differently, and that sometimes the most meaningful product decisions happen at the edges of the experience, not in the spec sheet. The foldable iPhone, for all its technical achievement, tells a different story. One of patience that may have cost momentum, of perfectionism that met competitive reality, and of a company that, despite its resources, still operates within the constraints of engineering timelines and manufacturing physics. Two products, two different strategic calculations. And perhaps a company that's learning to adapt in a market where it can no longer assume everyone will simply follow its lead. Catch you next one. Peace out.